Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time once again for the Beat the Off Path podcast. On this podcast, we showcase unusual success stories because unusual times call for unusual success stories. And we are living in some very unusual times, folks. My guest today has made it in Hollywood in every sense of the word. He built an awesome career for himself in the path of lighting or gaffing or director of photography. He talks about the gear. He talks about unusual ways of making income. He talks about how to build momentum in Hollywood. There is nothing but gold in this episode. It is one of the most practical episodes we have done. If you pay attention, there is a lot to be learned about making it in show business, in the world of film, and there is just so much that I am going to personally gain from this. I'm very, very excited. He has done incredible things, as you can see by the images scrolling through your screen right now. This man knows what he's doing, and he's worked on some massive projects for huge brands. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce my next guest, Jacob Abrams. All right, Jacob Abrams, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
To start off, would you say that you have more of a career or more of a racket?
Definitely a career. I mean, it's, I'm sort of doing what I wanted to do since high school, and it's sort of pretty much the same thing, but it's just evolved a bit, you could say.
Okay. So would you consider yourself more of a hustler or more of a scam artist? I'm just kidding. No, just joking. It's an extremely hostile interview.
Both?
It's a very hostile interview. No, but tell everybody what you do. What is your current profession?
Yeah, so I'm a gaffer in Hollywood. I light commercials and TV shows and movies, and I own a lighting rental company and sort of my own small race team as well.
Wow, that's an unusual pairing. I like this already.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, what is a gaffer?
So basically, I'm the person in charge of the lighting design on a film. So, director and a director of photography will come to me and say, hey, we want it to look like there's warm sunlight coming through this window and, blah, blah, blah. And then I execute that. I pick the right lights, the people, the cable, the logistics. I tell them how long it's going to take, and I'm also the guy who's there dialing in the light to make sure it's aimed in the right place and got the right color on it and everything. So I'm involved from the pre-production stages of figuring out, okay, we want this warm sunlight to come in through the window, all the way through the finished process of making sure it's there and doing what it should do.
So what is a day in the life?
It can vary quite a bit. I mean, it's I'd say half the days are spent on set, actually lighting stuff, and the other half are spent, either scouting or just in the office or prepping trucks. So it's like, if I get a call for a commercial that shoots on a Friday and it's a Monday, basically my week is pretty much one day on set that Friday, but the rest of the week is I'll start with a scout. We'll go to the house we're shooting at, and we'll take a look at it and decide what we want to do. And so that's a day. And then the next day is just office work. It's figuring out, okay, well, what lights do I need to bring? What time do we need to start? What size generator do we need? How much cable do we need? How many people do we need? All the logistics, just figuring that all out, mapping it out, putting it down on paper for everybody, quoting it out, getting it approved. And then the third day is loading the trucks, prepping the gear, making sure all the lights work, making sure they're organized and labeled. And then, on the fourth day, you show up and shoot it.
So would you say that the majority of your time is spent working not on set?
It definitely can be. I mean, there's obviously, when it's busy, sometimes those that perfect scenario, those 4 days of prep kind of overlap, and okay. I might be on another commercial and totally miss the physical prep for the next one, and I'll send one of my guys to cover it for me, and I'll just do a little bit of catch-up work at night over the phone. And so when it's not too busy, it's I'm spending 4 days a week doing office stuff and 1 or 2 days a week on set. And when it's busy, it could easily be 6 days a week on set. It just depends.
And do you tend to limit how many days that you're working, or is it just you take whatever you can get when it comes in?
No, I try and limit it to a degree, because I'm all about quality over quantity. Like I'd rather only take jobs that I can 100% commit to and be 100% prepared for going into them, because you've got to uphold a standard of quality, otherwise nobody's going to hire you. If you just show up and do a crummy job, nobody wins. Yeah, you might make an extra couple bucks, but you're going to lose a client. So long term, you're out of luck there.
Well, I mean, I think, here in LA, people know about lighting and, the business of show, as it were. But I think in the general population, people probably don't know what a gaffer is. They have some loose concept that lighting is a thing that exists in the Netflix shows they watch. But I think very few people, I'm guessing here, would think of it as a viable career path. So how did you get tuned into the idea to do this? At what age? I mean, you probably weren't born or in middle school thinking like, I'm going to be a gaffer, right? Or was that the case?
No. Quite the opposite. I mean,
okay.
Like anybody who gets interested in movies in high school, it's like, you think you want to be a director or producer. I mean, you look at like somebody like Steven Spielberg and think, okay, I want to be that guy.
Right.
Because especially when you go to a movie and you see the credits roll, the first name you see is the director or the producer and maybe the lead actor. Right. And then you walk out of the theater most of the time and you don't know who the other 900 people are that worked on the movie.
It keeps on scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't register that there's other people who can make a really good living doing what they do behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so I went to film school at Florida State, thinking I wanted to be a director or producer, and we were lucky there that they give you the option to try a little bit of everything, and they even sort of force you to try a little bit of everything. You've got to be a director, you got to be a producer, you got to be a writer, you have to be a boom operator, a sound mixer, an editor, a production designer, a key grip. And a camera assistant, and the list goes on. And you get a taste of, what you like and what you don't like, and what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I realized pretty early on, I didn't actually like directing or producing. It just, it wasn't for me. It wasn't fun. It wasn't what I got, excited about doing when I was working on a movie. And what I did get excited about was the aspect of actually photographing it, the lighting and the lensing of it. And so I focused on being a director of photography in college, and that was where I sort of focused all my energy from, on a couple weeks into school when I realized that's what I wanted to do. And I bought a DSLR, and I spent every day not at school, not working on films, just shooting photos and reading blogs about photography and about lighting and about lenses, and like I lived and breathed it 24/7.
Wow. So you're saying like within a couple weeks of freshman year, you knew that, or?
No, freshman year was more like gen ed classes and basic film stuff, film theory. So we got into actual like physical production and doing all the real jobs on set sophomore year, and it was. Probably 2 weeks into sophomore year, maybe 3, before I realized, this is like, not what I want to do at all. Wow. I would rather, if I had to stick to directing or like drop out and go to business school, I was going to go to business school. But
oh my God, that's really saying
it wasn't for me.
Business school being, of course, the worst thing ever, as those commercials for DeVry Institute taught us, or what was it, the Art Institute from when we were kids in the 90s or whatever. They're like, their dad wants them to go to business school.
Oh, completely. That was the pressure from ever since I was 16 or 17 years old, when I told my dad I wanted to go to film school. And he was like, no, you're going to business school. You're going to the University of Pennsylvania like I did, and your grandfather did, and your aunts and uncles did, and everybody in my family did. And
oh my goodness.
So there was a bit of pressure not to go, the direction I did.
So, well, interesting that it was internally motivated, because it could have been the other way around. You could say, I love directing, but I got all the feedback on my projects that I sucked. And at a certain point, I took a hint. Like, it could be externally motivated, but in your case, it was, no, I don't like doing this. And that was where the shift came from. Yeah. So, all right. So sophomore year, you're thinking about composing a shot. At what point did lighting specifically start to creep in as a career path option?
I don't know, it must have been the end of sophomore year when we started shooting on physical film on Super 16 and took some real lighting classes in film school, and had to learn how to use a light meter, and sort of, because you're shooting on film, you've got to learn how to see the image before it's developed, because you don't get it back for a week. So you need to know what you're doing, and be able to execute it without any feedback. And in that process of like really sitting down and focusing on like, okay, what does every single light do on set? What's its purpose? Both technically and creatively. It was just, I found it fascinating, especially there was one specific challenge where, the director told me they wanted these beams, these shafts of light coming through this hallway. And, I'd seen it plenty in movies. It was like, oh, that's easy. We just use this light and we put it right here and, we get a beam. And I went and did that and nothing happened. And we didn't get the beam, and I had no idea why not. And it was at the same time infuriating as it was inspiring to know that there's just so much more to this that I don't know, that I could know. And it just, it forced me to really take a step back and say, wow, there's a lot to this. I need to learn more to get good at it. And I think I'm close enough, so this might be a cool path.
What I have a dual degree. My other bachelor's is in film studies as well. And our senior project was done on film on 16 millimeter. And that was insane, like splicing, but we had to cut it by hand. Like we literally had to cut it and tape it together. And we had a very limited amount of film because they had no budget. So we had like just a certain, maybe a couple canisters. That's it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So it was like a super short film, but we also had like a little canister of sound. We were recording sound on magnetic tape, I guess. And I ran out of sound, but when I had some extra film. So I had to use like shots that we had cut. I spliced it into the soundtrack because I figured out it was the same size. So like my moments of silence and the sound were like bits of unused film. It was very ghetto, but it was certainly an eye-opening process. And the result was really, really cool. I mean, we took it to a professional color correcting facility. And that was when I learned how much can be done with film versus digital. It blew my mind because they're like, somebody's like, oh, see your shirt? It's blue. And then he just moved a knob and my shirt was bright red, as clear as it had ever been. Like, and I was like, what?
It's mind blowing the first time you see it. It's like, wow, how do you do that so easily? Like, there's so much that can be done.
They just pushed and pulled it so much farther than anything. And of course, like, it's not like digital tools were that great at the time. It was like Final Cut 7 or something like that. So but the difference was extreme. That was when I started to get a bit of a respect for the industry and like, okay, you guys are serious.
Taking a step back in my career, I actually, I actually really got into it as a result of learning like visual effects and editing and stuff more than anything. Okay. Like I got into playing with After Effects, Adobe After Effects, like in early like public release build. I don't know what you call it, but I mean, it hadn't been out for too long for like normal people to use on a desktop computer.
Yeah.
And I just got super into that. And in high school, even in, like film TV classes, and, was sort of pushing it to the limit of what could be done on a desktop computer with zero knowledge of how this shit actually works. And did some, stuff that my teachers in high school and my friends were like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I had no idea this was even possible.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like those moments were the sort of aha moments, like, okay, maybe I can make a career in this. Because I was, without any real guidance, already sort of a couple steps ahead of everybody else, and had some success in like student film festivals as a result of it. And,
cool.
And that was, when I won a couple big student film festivals, that was sort of the moment I was like, okay, maybe I can, maybe I can make a career out of this and go to film school and do something with it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's awesome. I mean, so you're in college, you think this is something that you're going to do for a career. And then is the thought immediately, I need to move to LA? Or was that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So did you like
Oh, completely. I
graduate,
mean,
buy a plane ticket, and off you went, or how did that go?
more or less. I mean, pretty much I knew from like the minute I got into film school, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, the second I graduate, I'm moving to LA. Forget about New York. Atlanta wasn't a thing yet, so that wasn't even an option.
Okay.
Because LA is the place where we made movies. I mean,
Right.
that's where you're gonna be, right? And so yeah, it was. I graduated in December, and I decided it'd probably be wise to at least look for an apartment and look for a little bit of work to get me started to get some money before I moved out. So I waited.
Mm.
I waited about 3 months, just searching for a place to live and some
Mm.
initial leads, and then yeah, after 3 months after school, I moved out and yeah, I started working as a production assistant for a commercial production company that did like Home Depot commercials and
Okay.
Toyota commercials. And, a lot of big commercials that I
Cool.
was just a little gopher on them. Is the guy who gets waters and coffees for people
Yeah.
and just sort of seeing how it was done.
So how long did it take you to get that gig, and how did you get that gig?
That was sort of a lucky, somewhat distant family connection. It was my dad's college roommate's sister was a commercial producer.
Hmm.
And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, can we sit down and, have a coffee and, talk about the industry? And yeah, I had a productive meeting with her and,
Mm.
she said, let me know when you're available. I'll try to get you on in a couple of days as a PA.
Sweet.
And she made it very clear she's not going to give me a career as a PA. No, I'm not going to have like a guaranteed job moving out. But it was
Sure.
like, yeah, you get 3-4 days, and then you got to go find the rest on your own, and
Oh my
which was
God.
good.
Yeah.
But it was a good introduction to seeing how it's done at the highest level, and then making some really good connections in the process. Like, I was definitely nervous, sort of with
Right.
that understanding that, okay, yeah, I've got a couple days of work lined up and I've
That's
got
it.
to figure out the rest on my own.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it must have been on the second or third day, I met another PA who was transitioning from features into commercials. And she was, production coordinator on features. So sort of taking a step down into commercials to, sidetrack and move on to a different career path. And met that person, and she was able to quickly jump back up to working as a coordinator on commercials and was able to get me some work right after that transitioned into, working together for a number of years after.
Wow. So you had a couple of pretty good, I mean, I guess lucky breaks is one way to say it, but there
Yeah.
wasn't really a moment, there was no lull. So kind of like once you started, it just sort of took off.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, certainly that was the case. I mean, obviously, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do at first. Just working
Sure.
as a PA or camera PA or whatever.
Sure.
At first is no more than just sort of a basic income and sort of just like almost more film school. It's like you're just watching how the pros do it,
Right. Right.
which was good because there's no risk of me screwing anything up. I could just watch
Mm.
and learn, which was cool. And I did learn a lot. From guys like Darius Wolski, who shot all of like Ridley Scott's movies, and a couple other really talented cinematographers and directors, and so it was definitely good. That was my first year, I guess, was mostly that, and then shooting like little tiny zero budget short films on the side, and I would take what I'd seen on set that day and translate it to these little zero budget shorts I was shooting, and yeah, that was cool. But it was the real luck of it though was meeting that person, that production coordinator.
Mm.
The only reason that we even really connected, or she saw me out from the crowd, was that we were doing casting for a Home Depot commercial at a Home Depot. And I had my laptop open with a still I had shot on a set in film school of like this gangster movie with rain coming down and stuff. And she's like, oh, what's that movie? That looks cool. And I'm like, oh, like I did that in film school.
Nice. Wow.
And she's like, oh, no way. That looks like a real movie. I'm like, no. Like that's a
Whoa.
still I shot in film school. And then, so, next thing you know, some of my film school work is fast forward 8-9 years, and that's getting me huge commercials with the same person. And like, who would have thought?
My God, that is so awesome. Were there moments of doubt or regret? Were there moments where you had that typical kind of LA hangover where you're sitting there thinking like, my God, what have I done? It's so expensive. There's
Yeah.
helicopters and there's high crime. Did you have that, or was it always, this is where I want to be?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was a sort of a weird circumstance I found myself in not too long after moving out here, where, like I said, I wanted to be a director of photography. I wanted to shoot,
Mm,
and I started shooting some smaller music videos for a friend of mine who had been out here a little longer than I, and was starting to work his way up. And next thing you know, it all came crashing down around me when I shot some behind the scenes stills for that director friend. And Airy, one of the biggest camera companies, saw the stills and wanted to use them for marketing material.
mm,
And I was like, okay, this is amazing. Not only is it going to get my name out, but I can actually charge them a licensing fee and make some money off of this, which is great because I wasn't making much money, as a PA.
mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, the production company involved with the production of the music video that I shot the stills on calls me and says, "Hey, you can't do that. We own the rights to those photos. We want all
Oh,
the
right.
money. Go screw yourself." And I'm like, no, no, no. Like, I did this as a favor for free for this director friend. You never paid me. You don't own the rights. And
Yeah.
now we're in this stupid legal battle over, a couple $1,000s. And that's not even the worst part of it. I mean, yeah, I was worried about losing that money when I wasn't making a whole lot. And yeah, I was like, afraid of going broke, sure. But the bigger issue was that the person that I was now battling over, the licensing on these photos was the executive producer who owned the production company that I was shooting all these music videos for. And that was like my one career path, and it was going great. It was going up, 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 shooting bigger ones and bigger ones. And then
Mm-hmm.
next thing you know, the guy who's hiring me and giving me these opportunities to shoot now wants to sue me and never wants to hear from me again. And I'm like, what have I done? This is a
Oh,
complete disaster. My career has just been thrown in the toilet over a stupid photo.
right. And what happened? Did it resolve
Um,
itself? Did you just say forget it?
uh,
I'm bowing out, or my
yeah,
apologies?
well,
Or
it ended up resolving it to the point where they got 66% of the money and I got
okay,
33% of it.
okay,
And, and it was sort of under the premise that I could still keep working for them. But, as soon as the check showed up, they were like, no, we never want to hear from you again.
my God,
And then, so yeah, all of a sudden, all these, music videos I was going to shoot, and, this chance to start really building my career and, meeting with agents and really establishing myself as a director of photography, just poof, gone up in smoke, didn't exist anymore. And so I basically, a year into being in LA, had this I don't know, quarter life crisis, if you will. It was like, this is bad. I've got to reinvent myself somehow.
hmm. Okay, so carry
Um,
on, man. This is fascinating
yeah.
stuff.
So, ultimately what that meant is that since most of my leads in terms of shooting stuff were now gone, I just started sort of taking work, doing whatever I could do. So I was working a lot as a camera assistant and working a lot as a grip and an electric and a gaffer. And, I sort of fell into working as a gaffer a lot because it was, a lot of the same responsibilities as being a director of photography, but, a lot less of the politics and a lot less of the pressure,
I see.
and just more ability to focus on the creative. Like, I didn't have to deal with delusional directors and producers and
Hmm.
all the egos. I just showed up and, did the fun stuff and went home and could sleep at night. And
Interesting.
I realized that, maybe that was kind of more for me because I didn't have to deal with all
You didn't
the
have to deal
crazy
with it.
Hollywood
Yeah.
nonsense. I could just
The eccentric types.
Go back. Yeah, exactly. Go back to the roots of what I enjoyed about making films in the first place in high school and in film school. And, that was, an enticing thing. And then I got a lucky break where, that same production coordinator, asked me to gaff a car commercial for Infinity with a director of photography from New York who didn't have any LA guys. And I don't know, I was maybe 22, 23 at the time. I was definitely not experienced enough to actually do this. And she said, oh, have you done car stuff? How to work with Russian arms and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, sure. No big deal. I got this. Completely fake it till you make it moment. And, I just did what any sane person would do and hire really good people underneath me.
Right.
And it went great. And, that led to a ton of other work because it was like all of a sudden I had something I could show that was, a real commercial for a real brand with a real budget. And, when people would come to me and say, hey, what have you done? I could show them that. They're like, oh, this looks great. You're hired. And that was a huge stepping stone into like really doing it on a professional level and not just like, little music videos and shorts and low budget stuff.
So leading up to this, with all the little things, how are you acquiring these gigs? Are you doing the Craigslist game? Is it all word of mouth?
Yeah, well, no, there was it was anything I could take. I mean, yeah, there was like Craigslist gigs, there was word of mouth, there was I'm trying to think. There was also there was a little bit of work coming through like my FSU like alumni network where I got some work from some other grads who moved out to LA and, sort of that network. And yeah, I was just, sort of aggressively advertising myself when I'm on set saying, hey, I'm available for so-and-so, hire me, doing whatever I could. But yeah, a lot of Craigslist stuff. And I met, somebody, a couple of people that I still work with to this day on Craigslist, which seems ridiculous because 99% of those gigs were ridiculous.
It's a cesspool.
Yeah, a lot of very clueless, egomaniacal, insane people that didn't even want to pay you. But a couple gigs that led to a real future. So
unbelievable. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a fast forward then. So give me a bullet point. What are career highlights at this point?
Yeah, I guess career highlights would be that like starting from the beginning would be probably doing that Infinity commercial. And then not long after that, I did a cool British sci-fi movie called Division 19, which most people probably haven't seen because it only came out a couple of years ago and it wasn't that big, but it was a big stepping stone for me to do a real movie with a decent budget and some famous actors behind it, so that was cool.
Great.
And then in terms of other features, I've done a couple more that were a couple million here and there, but in terms of budget, but nothing that I'd want to watch, so I'm not going to list those. Yeah, I mean they look cool, but the story wasn't good, so you probably haven't heard of them. I'm gonna gloss over that. So it's mostly like commercials. One of the coolest ones I ever did was unfortunately shortly after that never came out. It was with Stan Lee for Netflix for the Super Bowl. Whoa. They didn't finish it in time for the Super Bowl. We never saw it. It was cool though. And the big fast forward a couple years from the Infinity commercial, like the next big step from looking at it in just broader strokes was a commercial for Estee Lauder, which was one of the few commercials that I've ever seen that had like a full write-up in American Cinematographer magazine about how we did it.
So that's huge.
And that was a huge step because I've done an Infinity commercial, who cares? But now I've done a commercial that was cool enough to actually be written about, alongside, big movies by, Tarantino or Christopher Nolan or whatever, in the same pages of the same American Cinematographer magazine. And it's like, that was pretty cool. You know, because we did a lot of cool things and was sort of, you know, pushing it to the limit creatively, at least what, you know, we could do at the time with the constraints and the budget and everything we had. And also that was a huge career move for me because it was a bit of a risk even taking it because it was a union commercial and I wasn't officially in the union yet.
Okay. And you are now. You're in the union now, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I've been in for about 4 years now. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I wasn't officially in yet, and you know, most of the people in, you know, pretty much everyone in charge of hiring me, and you know, understood that and were willing to take the risk. But I got stabbed in the back by some people underneath me as a result of it, and so that's a whole nother story. But it was definitely a bit of a risk, and it ended up paying off, you know, massively, in, you know, moving forward, because it was, you know, something, you know, that really put me on the same level as some of the, you know, highest level guys out there that, you know, when somebody wanted to hire me for the biggest job out there, I could say, yeah, I've done this. This is as, you know, as high as it goes in the commercial world. So, you know, I'm your guy.
Cool. Well, now I think I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit, because obviously I'm assuming that up until this point you're relying on your talent and it's what you know and what you bring to the table. But to those who don't know much about the industry, obviously gear plays a tremendous role because there's an infinite amount of gear that you can have from what I know. I mean, I'm not really involved, but there's an infinite amount. I mean, these things aren't cheap. You know, a single light can cost what, 100 grand, 200 grand? Like if you want, like what's a RE Sky panel going to cost? A lot, right?
Yeah, it's expensive. Yeah.
So, and you're stacking together multiple panels, multiple lights, all of these kinds of things. I mean, it can quickly get into hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars just worth of gear. Cameras are what, a couple $100,000 for the Netflix camera, like what? Right, the Aria,
easily
Alexa,
$200K for just the camera. Yeah,
just
and then
the camera.
It could be $500,000 for your lens.
Right, so $500,000 for lenses. So kit is such a huge part. Sound is relatively cheap, which is good for a kind of audio person like me compared to all that other stuff. But the gear is huge. I mean, there's a reason that Netflix looks like Netflix or Planet Earth looks like Planet Earth, and that your DSLR footage doesn't look anything like that. So at what point did you start thinking, I have to start bringing some gear along with me? I have to start investing in gear. And what kind of gear did you start with to begin that part of the journey?
Yeah, that was a part of the journey that was actually kind of unexpected. It was like, you know, when I first started out, you know, when I first moved here and I was trying to shoot, not necessarily gaff, you know, everybody told me there's two routes you can take. There's, you know, the route of, yeah, my mommy bought me a red camera and now I'm a DP. And,
love that one.
You know, right. And it's hilarious, but it's true. There's a lot of those people out there. And, you know, some of them have actually parlayed that into real success when they've, you know, been humble about it and used it as an opportunity to have a good looking camera when, you know, production couldn't afford it, and, you know, eventually shot some cool enough stuff that they really got hired and paid for it. And then there's, you know, then there's the route of, I'm never going to own gear. I'm going to purely just rent what we need for the correct creative approach we're taking on the shoot. Right. You know, which is great if you can afford it. But the reality is, you know, when you're starting out, especially, it's like, chances are you can't really afford the right tool for what you're trying to do, especially on a music video where maybe the whole budget's 10 grand. And, you know, the camera package rental for what you really want is also 10 grand. And then, oops,
that's what I was going to say. It's like, you know, we're in a place where even the rental is still expensive for most normal people. You know, even a day rate on some of this stuff is nuts. So,
anyway, so I sort of fell into the latter camp, you know, for two reasons. I mean, one, I couldn't afford to go out and buy a $50,000 red camera. I was making $200 a day as a PA. The math doesn't add up there.
Right.
And also, you know, I did appreciate that creative integrity of like, okay, I want to choose the right tool for the job. And so, you know, I took that attitude forward with me for about, I don't know, almost 2 years. And then I did a gaffed a movie called Miss India America, which, you know, it was like I don't know, $600,000 or $700,000 budget comedy, and it was actually a pretty good movie. And the one big thing I learned on that was that, you know, we couldn't really afford the lights we wanted for the shoot because there was just so many other moving parts. And so, you know, we did afford a generator for the whole shoot, though, you know, a big tow plant generator. So it's like we had the capacity to power any of the bigger lights we wanted, but we just couldn't afford any bigger lights. So we're ganging up a bunch of small lights and not only doing more work, because okay, now you need 3 or 4 small lights next to each other as opposed to one big one, but it doesn't look as good because there's things you can do with one single bigger light you can't do with 4 next to each other because you get multiple shadows and all sorts of goofy stuff, right? And, you know, it occurred to me, okay, well, what if I bought that one bigger light that I wanted to use, and on the next little movie I could rent it to production, and, you know, I'd make another $500-$600 a week. Great. I mean, everybody wins, right?
Yeah.
And you know, so I basically spent the next 3 or 4 months like trying to figure out how that would best work. Like, okay, if I did that, how much really would I make from it? Would it actually create a return on investment, or am I just losing money and just doing it for the creative? Or and once I ran the math on it, I was like, yeah, it would. If I found a used one, in theory, it should pay itself back in 2 years. And if it would last longer than 2 years, which it should, it last 10, 15, then it should start to turn a nice profit after 2 years. And so then the search was on for a used light, and wanted a deep discount.
I know that game well.
And I spent months searching for one on Craigslist and on, lighting auction sites and used sales at rental houses and, everywhere you could think of. And then I stumbled upon one in the most unlikely of places at a website called reduser.net, which is, a place where you sell red cameras. And this guy was selling a Cine Mills 6K par, and for, I think it was like $4,500 at the time, with a ballast, with the head feeder, with the bulbs, everything you need, ready to turn on and work for $4,500, which is, a steal, because you try and buy, that was an older light, but you try and buy a similar one new and you're out, I don't know, $22,000.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That's serious.
So, right. So, and obviously there's some, floating around on the internet for similar prices and, that are also affordable, but that one was the best deal and the biggest light, because most of the other ones for sale were 4Ks, not 6Ks. And, I wanted an extra punch, an extra little bit of light, because that would be an easier selling point to production. Say, hey, I know you can get this 4K for cheap, but here's a 6K. It's, 30% bigger for, the same price. And so I gave this guy a call, and he said, okay, meet me halfway between LA and San Francisco in 2 weeks, and we're going to do an illegal tie-in to a warehouse to test it, because you need generators, generally speaking, to power these things.
Okay.
So this was in the middle of when I was doing that feature Division 19, and we had a weekend off, and I went out to, I don't know, it must have been like San Luis Obispo or somewhere near there, at this, met him at this middle of nowhere warehouse, which I was like, am I going to get killed here? Like, where are we going?
Hello,
yeah, not sketchy at all.
$4,500. Hello.
Yeah.
In cash.
Yeah, and I'm showing up with $4,500 in cash to pick up this light.
Right,
I saved up for. That was pretty much like my whole rate for the movie I just did, and so I'm like,
major stress.
Practically broke after spending all this, and it's all this money I'd saved up for over these months for this purpose. And I show up, and the guy's actually legit. He's a gaffer, who's retiring, getting out of the industry and selling all his equipment. and piece by piece, and we test the light and it works great, and have a good chat with the guy about lighting, and I throw the thing in my car and I drive it back down to LA, and then show up on set on Monday, and we start using it on the movie I'm doing, and a day after owning it, I'm already making a rental on it. I'm like, this is amazing. I mean,
and what are you
who would have
renting it
thought
out for? What was the starting day rate on this light?
I'm trying to remember the exact rate because it was a while ago, but it must have been like, I think $400 a week or something like that.
Okay. So $400 a week. So this is the first time in your career that you're supplementing your income as, I don't want to say the talent, but as a person doing something with equipment, right? You've never done that up until this point. Okay.
Yeah.
So
correct.
now
you're
increasing your income via this means.
Yeah. So all of a sudden I made, on 2 weeks with that, I made an extra $800, and I was like, this is awesome. I just spent $4,500, and in 2 weeks I just made $800. I mean, the math adds up there. This is going to pay itself off way quicker than I expected.
And did it? Because you said 2 years. When do you think it? How long until it paid itself back?
Oh, it was like 4 months.
Incredible. And then
it was quick. Especially I kept it at, obviously it's a huge light. It's like, where do you keep that? You don't. It lives on the truck with all the rest of the gear when you're showing up to set, but you can't just put the thing in your car every day to take it to set. So I made a deal with the rental house that I would normally rent all the trucks and equipment from, and said, hey, can I keep this light here? And in return, you guys can rent it whenever you need and just cut me, 60% of the check of, so if production's going to rent it for $500, then I'll get $250, you get $250, or, something like that. Right. And they didn't have anything in their inventory that was of a similar size at the time. They had some bigger ones and some smaller ones. There's nothing in the middle. So all of a sudden, next thing you know, I can't even use my own light anymore because they just keep renting it out and making money for me. And I'm like, this is amazing. I need to buy more.
Genuine passive income. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so 4 months out after your first purchase, you are thinking, all right, let's invest. What's the next step?
Yeah, well, so the next step was that, okay, me and this rental house are pretty close now. So the discussion was okay, what in their inventory is lacking? What do they need more of? What don't they have? At the same time, what's the light that I could get a rental for because it's a specialty thing?
Yeah.
And so the decision was okay, a couple 800 Jokers, which is, small HMI, which are super, super popular. And they said, okay, yeah, we only have one of those. So, if you bought two, yeah, we're going to rent them all the time. And then because they're specialty and, whatever, I could rent them a lot too. And that was significantly more expensive. And that was like $12,000 for the two.
Okay.
Which, is obviously a bit of a risk because now that's 3 times the cost of what I just paid for my last light. Yeah. I wanted to buy them new. It was like, these better make some money. And, those things were flying off the shelves too. And then I was renting them to production all the time. And, again, now I'm making another $400 or $500 a week on those. And, it was great.
That's awesome, man. So I know that now I think you have what, 2 trucks of gear or something like that. You have something insane. So when did from then, what's the time frame from there to today? When did that process start? How many years ago?
So that first light, that 6K par, I bought in the beginning of 2014. So that would be 6.5 years ago.
Okay.
And so it was basically 4 years or so. It was like kind of one light at a time. It's like, okay, I made another $5,000 from my lights. I'm going to go buy another light. I just kept reinvesting every penny of what the lights made into more lights.
Yeah.
Just one at a time, not borrowing any money, not taking out a loan or anything, just like slow compounding growth. Right.
Yes.
And it grew pretty quickly. I mean, faster than expected. I mean, to the point where all of a sudden, instead of having 2 lights at this rental house, I had 32 and I'm taking up multiple shelves, and to the point where they're like, you're taking up too much space. You're not bringing in as much money as you're taking out because you're not renting any stuff from us anymore because you own too much, get out of here.
Wow. Damn.
And, that was sort of unexpected because I've been giving them 100% of my business, pure loyalty to renting from them for, 6 years, 7 years. Right. And then, next thing you know, they're like, oh, get out of here. You're taking up too much space. We don't want you anymore.
That's rough.
And, at that point, I didn't own a truck or anything because I would just rent the trucks from them and they would help load the gear. And, I would just sub-rent whenever I didn't have from them. And it was a great system. Like it was mutually beneficial for a long, long time where they would get a bunch of money from my sub-rentals and from my truck rentals, and they'd help load and unload the gear and, and store it for me. And it was an amazing partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing you know, it's gone instantly. And, I knew really to survive moving forward, there weren't too many options. I mean, because when you're dealing with such a large amount of equipment, you need multiple people to handle it, right? To load it on and off the trucks and to count it and to check it and to test it and to make sure it works. So the one option as an individual to quickly bridge that gap is like, okay, you buy your own trucks and they're just sort of preloaded with what you're going to use, and then you can make little adjustments here and there, but it's like at least the truck's loaded and you're not spending 6 hours, 8 hours loading and unloading trucks every day.
Right. And you're in charge of this truck. And the truck is like the cheapest piece of the puzzle at this point.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, the truck purchase was 6 figures. I mean, they're not cheap.
Oh man, I did not know that. I would have thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's serious.
No. So it's basically, at that point, I owned a ton of gear, but there were a lot of things I didn't own. Like I didn't own a lot of like the basic cable and stands and like cheap things that it would make more sense for me to rent from this rental house because they'd load the stuff anyway, and it would just save me time and space not owning it, right? So all of a sudden I got to turn around and take out a huge loan for trucks, for business storage space, for truck parking, for all this other equipment that I didn't own to make up the difference. So I didn't have to be sub-renting stuff. I could be completely self-sufficient and really run my own operation. And, so I went from having, X amount of inventory and 2 months later, literally doubled to make up the difference.
So what percentage, I mean, it sounds like you got there's obviously 2 businesses going on here. Now there's this rental business, the equipment business, but there's still the creative you that's still wanting to actually do this stuff. So how's your time split? Is it mostly creative or is it mostly on the other business or like 50-50?
It's kind of 50-50.
Okay.
I don't have a lot of focus on just renting out the equipment just on its own as the equipment. Because if I wanted to do that and just rent out the trucks on their own, it's like at that point you've got to, hire full-time people working for you, right?
I was going to ask, did you hire anybody?
Yeah,
Have you hired staff? I easily could have done that, and I was making enough money to do that, but it was just the decision to avoid that was one, as I get worried about just focusing on the rentals, and I wanted to focus more on the creative. So, basically it's like people come to me to rent individual lights and it's like, boom, I, show up and give them a light and they go away and it's easy. Or I focus on mostly renting to the productions that I'm working on. Yeah.
So I'm able to still be focused in the creative and what I want to do. Because I don't think I want to, at this stage in my career, focus on just the rental side.
Sure.
Because it's just not really what I want to do.
Right.
And I don't want to just get stuck at home in an office just doing paperwork because that's not what I got into this
That's
for.
not what you.
And Right. I mean, that's the transition I'll make when I want to retire. And it's like, okay, I've got all this gear, and now I don't want to go to set. I just want to sit at home and play golf, and
exactly.
I'll let someone else run the business.
Exactly.
But for the time being, for the foreseeable future, it's like the ultimate goal is to still be focused on the creative while owning this business, which is mostly focused on renting to the productions that I'm on. And
right. So it's like you kind of went from, so you go from, I'm the creative guy, now I understand there's this gear component, and then you kind of merge the two, and now you're saying like, okay, you can hire me for your project, but I'm bringing along a truck of my gear for this project. So when you hire me, you're getting this truck of gear and my expertise at obviously a much, much, much higher rate than if it was just you by yourself. So, but it's coming with you. Are you driving the truck?
No.
Okay.
No. Generally speaking, it's like on a union commercial. We've got people with commercial driver's license, which are the Teamsters Union, which are professional drivers,
right?
Who
are
by the way to do.
I have a story about these drivers. Oh my God! So my block, they used to shoot on my block all the time. I live in East Hollywood for our listeners. So, I don't know what about my block looks so filmable, but there have been so many productions like on my block in front of my apartment for Fox, like CSI, big things, huge productions with the Star Wagons and all of this, like the whole block shut down. And some of these Star Wagons that they have the celebrities in, some of them are like semi-truck trailers. They're huge.
Oh, yeah. They're huge, yeah.
They had a couple of these. So it was I think it was CSI. It was a very big, like, A-list production. And there were a few of these things. And I live on a pretty narrow side street that is kind of in between two major arteries of LA. But it's very narrow, and there's cars. When there are cars parked on both sides, like a lot of LA streets, two-way traffic is tough. So I see this guy pull up with a semi front end, and he hooks onto the Star Wagon, and he's at one end of an entire city block. And I know where he needs to go. He needs to go the entire length of the block, but I see that he's facing the wrong way because the trailer hookup is facing, the opposite direction from where he needs to go. And I'm looking out of my second story window and I'm watching this and I'm just thinking to myself, like, how is this guy going to make this happen? Like, I'm looking at this problem. I've identified it as a pretty serious problem. And he gets in this thing, and I hear like the beep, 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 beep. He puts this thing into reverse, semi-truck in reverse, cars on both sides. Can't be much more than a car width in the street to work with, a whole block to go, blind semi-truck. And at the end of this, backwards with the semi-truck, you have a major street of LA, a major artery street with tons of traffic 24 hours a day. So it's like, okay, even when he gets there, how is this possibly going to work? Because he can't like put on a blinker and wait or see traffic. So I'm like, this is insane. So he goes, beep, beep, beep. This guy threads the needle in one motion. He backs all the way down the street. He backs onto the major street in one perfect motion, cuts through all of the traffic backwards, gets the front end out, and drives off like it was nothing. And I was just like, holy shit, like I've witnessed the greatest accomplishment in driving that I've ever seen in my life. I was clapping. I'm like, who are these guys? But that's kind of typical of a lot of like the professionalism that these people have. I was like, you are clearly next level. This is something you do like all the time. So I get it. Yeah, those commercial drivers. It's no joke.
Those guys make it look easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and like of course, like for other people, there's so much gear, so much cables, so much stuff, and you're looking at this whole street covered in shit, and you think, okay, it's gonna take them years to get rid of all this stuff. You go make yourself a pot of coffee, and you come back, and it's basically all gone. And you're like, okay, I see how this works. Like, y'all are really good at what you do. So massive respect, and obviously you're now a part of that yourself. I guess you're one of them. Well, this is super, super fascinating stuff, man. I think this is I think we've covered a lot of ground already. I'm going to go into a bit of like speedier questions here to kind of wrap up a little bit. So who do you admire most in your field right now? Who do you look up to? Who do you want to be most of all?
In my field specifically as a gaffer, the one person that, if I could trade places with, I think it'd be probably Mike Bauman,
Okay.
which, average Joe probably has no clue who this guy is.
I don't. Yeah.
Um, but, if you look him up on IMDb, he's been the gaffer on, so many huge movies in the last 30 years. I mean,
Okay.
most recently, you've probably seen Ford versus Ferrari. He did like the Phantom
Oh yeah.
Thread with
Wow.
Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yep.
He's done a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. He's did Birds of Prey, with Margot this year. He did the Hunger Games. He's done like The Island with Michael Bay.
Yep.
He's like the guy right now,
Wow.
and not only just from a creative perspective with all the awesome movies he's done, but he owns a huge lighting rental company that's
Okay.
actually bi-coastal. He's got
Wow.
a huge company that is operating almost autonomously of what he's doing, both in LA and in New York, and
Wow.
at the same time doing like a movie like Ford versus Ferrari. It's
Yeah.
like
So he's got the artistic cachet and the business acumen.
Exactly, he's got
That's
it all.
awesome. Film school, need to have it or not?
It depends. I think it really comes down to money and time, right? So it's like if you're going to go to film school and spend $250,000 and get student loans and all that shit, I don't think it's worth it. But if you can go even to a friggin' community college or like super basic one for cheap and just spend the time learning even on your own with no pressure, I think it's great. I mean, because I was lucky, I got almost a full scholarship, and so the whole thing was free, and it was kind of a no brainer, right?
Congrats.
But it obviously that's not the case for a lot of people. But the big thing was like it just gives you the opportunity to experiment with no pressure at a creative level. Because once you get out here and you get hired to do a commercial, it's like you got to get it done in the 10 or 12 hours they give you. You can't just be goofing around experimenting with stuff. You need to know exactly what you're going to do and show up and do it. Even the same thing on music videos. It's like the schedule is all very, very tight. And if if you don't know what you're doing because you're finding it still, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to get hired. So it's like that's what's cool about film school. It's just that time to experiment with no pressure.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd encourage people to do what I did, which was, when you're not making films, just grab a camera and just go shoot stuff. Just go out and shoot street photography and just learn about lenses, lighting, and motion, and just observe things with your eyes and force yourself to keep learning. I mean, I feel like that self-guided learning is just as important as the stuff they actually teach you in school.
Fascinating.
Because think about it. It's like if you just show up to your film school classes and your film school films, it's like practicing a sport only when the official practices are. But if you really want to get good at that
I've
sport,
seen that.
you better be practicing outside of this official practices.
The movie is called The Sandlot for those who want to see that principle in action, right? For those of us born in a certain generation. Best piece of advice you've ever gotten professionally?
General or specific to the film industry?
Either way, but with a business slant, let's say, career slant, I suppose. But general is fine, either way.
I'd say it's sort of like, push everything to the limit of what you're capable of doing. Don't half-ass anything, because I've always found if it's worth doing, it's worth giving 100% of your energy into it, and sometimes pushing it over the limits of where you feel comfortable, and that's where you really start learning and pushing your own boundaries and getting better at what you do too. Like if you're not afraid to take a risk, then most of the time it'll pay off. And if you're hesitant to go outside of your comfort zone, I mean, I guess it's very general advice, but it's like you're not really going to learn. You're not going to get better. You're just going to get stuck where you're at. And you see that with a lot of people that are afraid to push the limit and take risks because they're afraid of, okay, maybe if I screw up, I'm not going to get hired for the next job. Well, yeah, that's true. But guess what? If you knock it out of the park, you're going to get hired twice as much as you would. So, you just got to pay close attention when to take those risks and when not to. And when you see that opportunity, just go for it.
Well, hot damn, man. That is a wonderful cap to our discussion, I feel. I think this has been great, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I think for anybody who listens to this, there's a lot of gold in here. Now, we may not have too many people listening to it, but there's a lot to think about. So thank you for sharing all of that and just for coming on, man.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, dude. So unless you have any parting words, I think the podcast is over, my friend.
No, I think, that's about it. That's all I got to say.
All right, sounds good. Podcast over.
That's all she wrote.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Off Path podcast. If you've been enjoying this show, please like, comment, share, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to me on YouTube. It would mean the world to me. Also, do you have an unusual success story or do you know someone who does? Well, please recommend them to me. They could be a future guest on this show. Maybe they've rolled the largest boulder down the mountains of Tibet. Or maybe they built the world's largest chicken farm in Madagascar. The point is, I don't know what I don't know, so I'm looking for inspiration and unusual success stories. So help me by being a part of this adventure. I'm looking to grow this podcast with you. Thanks again for listening.